Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Hafiz Salmawi. I'm a professor of energy engineering at Zagreb University in Egypt and key expert in the project support to the technical and financial sustainability of renewable energy and energy efficiency sectors. It's our pleasure in the project to hold our 8th webinar on the role of energy sector integration for the optimization of the use of energy, energy efficiency, decarbonization, and energy security. This webinar is a part of our program of webinars, which tackles the developments of sustainable energy in Egypt from different aspects, including technical, planning, financial, investment needs and challenges, business models, sector integration, regulations, public awareness, and energy transition. Actually, we have several webinars tackling green financing, hydrogen, guarantee of origin certificates, waste to energy, and this has come energy transition, and this has come as an 8th webinar on our program. As all of you currently know, that this project is an EU-supported project in cooperation with both Ministry of Electricity and Renewable Energy and Ministry of Petroleum and Mineral Resources in Egypt. This project is executed by a consortium of consultants led by DAI Human Dynamics. The project consists of 5 components, including reorganization, the core functions of New and Renewable Energy Authority in Egypt, NAREA, modernization of the renewable energy framework, establishment of an energy modeling unit, establishment of the Cairo Sustainable Energy Information Center, and technical assistance to the Energy Efficiency and Climate Unit at the Ministry of Petroleum and Mineral Resources. Ladies and gentlemen, our webinar today is about the role of energy sector integration for the optimization of the use of energy, energy efficiency, decarbonization, and energy security. According to the European Energy Strategy on Energy System Integration, which has been issued in July 2020, sector integration has been defined as the linking various energy carriers, such as electricity, heat, gas, and other fuels with each other and with end-use sectors such as building, transport, industry, etc. For this purpose, we will have the chance to listen to experts from different economic sectors who will shed light on how could create a synergy between these sectors with each other and with the energy sector for the benefit of all of them. The old silo approach of different sectors, which develop their plan based only on tracking the demand development, will not be suitable with the new era of energy transition. This energy transition is not only led by national plans, it's also affected by technology development and international policies. Several questions can be raised regarding the future development of different sectors. This may include, for example, for water desalination. Do we need to go for large combined power and water desalination projects or rely on distributed RO plants or both? And in this case, with what proportion? Also, do we go for switching our transport sector from liquid fuel to electricity or natural gas or biofuels, or use more clean hydrocarbon fuels, or all of these, and with which proportion? On the same line, what kind of changes we need to introduce to our building practices and codes to be suitable for the distributed power system and accommodation of necessary charging facilities for electric mobility. Furthermore, how we can increase the share of renewable energy considering consumers' demand response. These are just few questions which could not be answered without having such sectors integration approach. In addition to our distinguished experts, we have the opportunity to have Professor Ghada Barsoum, Chairman of the Internal Policies and Administration Department at the American University in Cairo, to provide us with some conclusions based on the lessons learned from our experts' presentation. This may include what could be needed to be done and what could be a roadmap to achieve sector integration. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ahmed Beltagi, Energy and Transport Sector Manager at the European Union delegation to Egypt, to deliver his opening speech for this webinar. The speech will be on European Union energy sector integration strategy. Dr. Beltagi.
Thank you, Dr. Hafiz. Thank you very much for this introduction. It's my pleasure to welcome you all today. The speakers, the participants' profiles, and the topic are all very interesting. And I'm glad to address you all today. Indeed, the project mentioned by Dr. Hafiz Salmawi, the support to the financial and technical sustainability of the energy, renewable energy and energy efficiency sectors, is funded by the EU and is one of our main projects, the EU main projects in the energy sector for the time being. And we are all proud about the performance of the project, our key experts. And I would like also, before starting, to thank also the organizer, Marian Kusman, for this organization. Thank you very much. So I'm going to shed light today, in a nutshell, as requested, on the European energy system integration, latest development. Just to tell you that at present, the energy system has a rigid structure. In Europe, it is built on parallel and vertical energy value chains. In other words, specific sources of energy are linked to specific uses, specific end uses. The EU Commission has concluded that this system is too technically and economically inefficient to deliver a climate neutral economy. The outcome is significant losses, such as waste heat and low energy efficiency. The newly endorsed EU energy system integration strategy sets out a vision of how to accelerate the transition from inefficiently structured energy value chains to a system that can deliver low carbon, reliable, and resource efficient services at lowest possible costs. To sum up on this point, the current system is way too wasteful and way too rigid to fit a sustainable future, and there is a need to complete an overhaul of the current energy system, which is quickly becoming a relic of the past. It is crucial to address these shortcomings in order to reach climate neutrality by 2050 by planning and operating the EU's energy system in a holistic way. The strategy enables the combination of decarbonized and renewable energy supply with efficient demand-side technologies. In other words, there is a need to stop transferring the wrong energy carriers in the wrong way to end users. Through using the relative strengths of different energy carriers and by minimizing waste, the strategy aims to achieve deep decarbonization at the lowest possible cost for society. So, but how will the strategy achieve its purpose? The strategy identifies three complementary and mutually reinforcing elements. First one, a more circular energy system with energy efficiency at the core. Under this, I would like to say that an increase in energy efficiency will decrease overall investment cost and energy production needs. EU member states will be given guidance on making the principle, or are giving guidance on making the principle of energy efficiency first operational when implementing EU and national legislation. Another important improvement within this element is to increase the use of local energy sources. A significant unused potential has been identified in waste heat from local industrial sites and data centers, for example. The International Energy Agency has found that globally about 44% of the required reductions in the energy sector's greenhouse emissions can be achieved through energy efficiency measures, and an additional 35% can be achieved by switching to renewable energy. Eurostat's new statistics on energy consumption for 2018 found that the EU is set to miss the 2020 energy efficiency objective by a margin of up to 5%. Similarly, the EU is not on track to meet its targets for in the future. The Renewable Energy Directive and Energy Efficiency Directive will be revised to reduce waste heat. Another untapped source that will contribute to a more circular energy system is wastewater and biological waste for bioenergy production. This can be used on site at farms, for example, and its combination with renewable energy sources such as solar electricity. The second element is an increased direct electrification and end-use sectors. So you know that future electricity demand is bound to increase to enable decarbonization and climate neutrality. Renewable energy electricity is becoming cheaper and its use needs to be extended, especially in highly fossil-dependent sectors such as industry, transport, and buildings. So the electricity share of final energy consumption is projected to grow from 23% today to 30% in 2030 and 50% by 2050. This share has only increased by 5% over the last 30 years. Management of the electricity system at regional and local level will need several policy and legislative developments according to the strategy. One measure that will address this is the development of regional coordination centers in 2022, creating a more robust clearance analysis, clearer coordination and infrastructure planning.
Is disconnected. Dr. Ahmed, you still on? Dr. Ahmed disconnected. I hope we could reconnect with Dr. Ahmed. Could we call him yes. Actually, Dr. Ahmed was talking about the new EU policy regarding integrated energy policy, together with the cooperation between different European countries in order to achieve carbon neutrality. Practically, one of the main drivers in Europe for energy policies basically and strategies basically carbon neutrality. Sure, this is a part of a concern and our concern in Egypt, yet we are also focusing on energy security, which is an important part of our scope, as well as reducing energy imports. So also it goes on the same line. We try to mobilize as maximum as possible of renewable energy and do electrification, resort to more green kind of fuels, specifically as we know that the Green Deal in the EU has established or in the process for establishing a new system for carbon border adjustment mechanism, which will a kind of a taxes on import to the EU regarding their carbon footprint. This might make a challenge to us in Egypt in order to green our exports, and not just our exports, maybe or our product in large, which goes in line because currently renewable energy is cheaper or considered the most cheapest source of energy. Yes, it has its challenges regarding intermittency, and this is how integrating both the supply side with the demand side could create a kind of a synergy where the demand response is considered now one of the key elements. For example, producing hydrogen from an excess capacity of renewable energy help in reducing curtailment of the unit. At the same time, it helps in developing another source of energy which provide a kind of more flexibility to approach sectors which couldn't be approached before using renewable energy. If we couldn't reach back Dr. Ahmed Beltagi, I think we could switch right to our next presentation. Where we're going to have a presentation by Dr. George Yanakidis. He is an expert at a strategy expert at the project support to the technical and financial sustainability of renewable energy and energy efficiency. Dr. George Yanakidis holds a degree in mechanical engineering from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, Greece, and a PhD from Imperial College of Science, Technology, and Medicine, University of London. UK. He worked as initially as a senior consultant and then as a head of the Energy Systems Analysis Laboratory in the Center of Renewable Energy Sources and Savings at Greece for a total of 19 years. Since 2016, he is working as a freelance energy consultant. He has more than 20 years of professional experience in the sectors of renewable energy, energy efficiency, energy planning, energy modeling, energy system analysis, and energy statistics. He has a strong experience in international energy consulting and cooperation with several energy institutions in the EU member states and third countries. By the way, Dr. George was a key expert in developing Egypt's energy strategy for 2035. He has worked in Eastern European countries, in the Middle East, in Egypt, and Africa on energy planning issues, with a focus on the development of energy strategies using energy system models. He has been the project coordinator for 4 EU-funded projects in the field of energy planning and energy modeling over the period of the last 10 years. He participated in the Energy Technology System Analysis Project, ETSAP, of the International Energy Agency, IEA, as a national representative between 1999 and 2016, and as operating agent from January 2012 until December 2016, and is currently the project head since January 2017. Dr. Janakidis, Dr. Ahmed Beltagi back. Okay, Dr. Ahmed, sorry, George, Dr. Ahmed, I appreciate if you can proceed your speech.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm very sorry. I don't know what happened, but I lost all connections all of a sudden. So I'm very sorry. Sorry, George, for this. So I was on point 3 in the strategy, the use of renewable and low carbon fuels, including hydrogen for use application, where direct heating or electrification are not feasible. For end-use applications that are harder to decarbonize, such as industry and heavy transport, this is an important element of the strategy. Rapid action is needed in these sectors. For example, at present, only 0.05% of total jet fuel consumption originates from liquid biofuels. How has all of this been perceived by stakeholders? The reaction to the strategy have been a mix of positive and alarmist. Some says the Commission got it right. Energy efficiency and electrifications are the primary drivers to decarbonize the economy, producing renewable and low carbon hydrogen, for instance, for maritime transport, aviation, and industry in the next frontier. When it comes to low carbon fossil-based hydrogen, the strategy has received negative critique. The continued support of low carbon fossil-based hydrogen is not appropriate even during a transitional phase, according to this point of view. So fossil-based hydrogen coupled with carbon capture and storage should, according to this category of stakeholders, not to be promoted at the expense of renewable solutions. In summary, and I'm sorry I've taken long from your time, turning the vision of an integrated and flexible energy system into reality requires resolute action. Now, investments in energy infrastructure typically have an economic life of 20 to 60 years. The steps taken in the next 5 to 10 years will be crucial for building an energy system that drives Europe towards climate neutrality in 2050. I wish you all excellent exchange throughout this webinar, and many thanks for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you very much. I think the final word, what you said, is really expressing the challenge we have. What we used to do over the last 60 years, we need to change it over the coming 5 to 10 years. I think this is the main challenge. Back to George. I appreciate George. He will going to present to us energy sector integration. Please, George, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Hafiz. Good morning, all. So following up to the discussion, the presentation by Dr. Ahmed, let's go and dive a bit into how can we basically utilize, how can achieve this integrated energy system through integrated energy planning. As was already mentioned, the existing energy system is rigid, and energy planning has been reflecting this structure. So far, we have basically planning separate supply chains. And for instance, the power sector has been doing their own plans, the oil and gas sector has been doing their own plans, and the end users have been assumed to demand specific energy sources. So when we think about cars, vehicles, we think about oil and gas products. So everything has been planned sort of in this, following this rigid structure of the energy system. But what we can see is that this overall planning approach and the approach of operating the energy system is not optimal. So it leads in an overall inefficient energy system. That's why we're talking about energy system integration. So we are talking about planning and operating the energy system as a whole, as it should be, across the different energy carriers. So we're talking about electricity, heat, gas, and solid and liquid fuels together, but also the end-use sectors, building, transport, or industry. And why do we do this? Because in this way, we will be able to allow the optimization of the energy system as a whole. So basically, we'll be able to exploit synergies between sectors and also help link new technologies and new processes and new business models. We're talking about ICT, information communication technology. We're talking about the digitalization of the energy system, the use of smart meters, the use of smart grids, and the flexibility market. So we're talking about new ways of new business models of working in the energy system, which can help in the overall optimization. And is there an example? So the easy example is the electrification of transport, for which we are all talking about at the moment. It's not only the transport sector which is affected, it's the power sector which is affected, because we have new load curves and new demands that have to be satisfied. It's the oil and gas sector that is also affected, and also the biofuels, because there have been a lot of plans for biofuels, for instance, so in Europe in particular. So this could be affected through the transport electrification. And then we also have the other demand sectors, so the building sector, because the charging points could usually be in our houses, in our homes. So of course, the load of the building sector would be affected. And then we're talking about digitalization and how can this be integrated? Because how could the pattern of charging or smart charging could actually contribute to the operation of the power system, utilizing car batteries as storage devices in the system overall. So this gives you basically an idea of how important this would be. Dr. Ahmed mentioned the EU strategy for energy system integration as part of the European Green Deal for decarbonization of the energy of the system overall by 2050 in Europe. And what can be the core concepts overall? So what is we're always saying in energy system planning is that energy efficiency is important. So the first step would be to utilize existing energy sources in a most efficient way, and utilizing also waste energy streams. So waste heat in industry, utilize wastewater treatment as well, and use energy from that. Direct electrification of end-use sectors by utilizing less electricity, which is becoming more and more cheap because the cost of the technology is being reduced. So this helps us put aside more polluting fuels that are being used in the end-use sectors. Use of low-carbon fuels or renewable or fuels generated through renewable energy, including hydrogen for other end-use applications. And what I've mentioned is the use of this multi-directional system. So far, we are used in having an energy system where suppliers provide energy to the consumers. Here, we're talking about new concepts. We're talking about prosumers, so each one of us could basically consume and produce at the same time, contributing to the energy system, which has to be taken into account the tools that are being offered by digitalization, the possibility to operate in a smart way, utilizing local generation of energy, not only electricity, but energy in general. What could be the benefits? The first benefit would be, of course, the environmental effects, which will be minimized. So reduce greenhouse gases emissions by the use of renewable energy overall, but also utilize more efficiency the energy sources that we have. So utilize waste energy, waste heat, utilize increase energy efficiency overall, also strengthen the competitiveness of the economy by producing a more sustainable, more efficient technologies and solutions, and provide additional flexibility of the system. We'll be talking about flexibility, especially in the power sector, quite a lot, but this can help integrate larger share of renewables overall. It can boost storage technologies. It can also improve the overall resilience and the security of supply of the system by utilizing local energy sources and making sure that the system operates in a stable way overall. In order to have such an energy integrated system, we need an integrated energy planning approach overall. We need large amount of data and a large amount of good data overall. Planning in generally demands a lot of data, but if you do an integrated system planning, of course, you need all the data from the different sectors. We must take into account that it is an interdisciplinary approach and it's a multi-sectoral approach. So we need to really break down the barriers that exist in between sectors and make sure that we collaborate so that we can have a system that is planned based on the principles of sustainability, of reliability, and affordability overall. Integrated energy system planning should take into account, first of all, an integrated energy system model. So we have to look in all the different steps of extracting, transforming, transporting, and utilizing energy in the different sectors. We should also take into account the fact of decentralized energy generation overall. We should take into account the options of energy efficiency in the end demand sectors. And in specific sectors like power sector, where variable renewables can play a significant role, we should focus into more detail by doing detailed power sector modeling in order to see exactly how technically the system can operate, especially in the case where we have high variable renewables and high distributed generation shares. Of course, in all these processes, we need to examine the effect of emissions of greenhouse gases overall. And we shouldn't forget that energy is an integral part of the economy. So the effects of the energy system on the overall energy of the overall economy should be taken into account. So at the level of planning, this means that we should integrate macroeconomic modeling in our approach in order to make sure that the effects of a changing energy system can be properly taken into account in the overall economy operation. So having this in mind, within the current project, we're basically utilizing such an approach for the update of the National Energy Strategy for Egypt in the time horizon to 2040. So we're using an energy system model, which is based on the model generator called TIMES, which has been developed by the IEA. So this is focusing on all the energy system as a whole. We're also utilizing a macroeconomic model, medium to long-term horizon, in order to see what kind of effects on the economy would a change in the energy system have. And then we're also looking into a more detailed analysis of the power sector by a power system operational model, which is basically doing an hourly level simulation of the power system in order to see if the solution, especially in the case of high variable generation, is feasible technically and it can basically operate, and then see in more detail the issues that have to do with the generation system adequacy, the flexibility of the operation of the storage units, or the curtailment, so the loss of energy that is being generated by renewable energy in the system. So overall, what are the advantages and what is being offered by integrated energy system planning? First of all, we can analyze technology and fuel competition and take into account fuel switching overall. Model distributed generation, which is something quite important overall in the case of variable renewables especially, and then integrate of renewable energy, and not only in the power sector, but also biofuels. And then here we have interlinkages with land use and water use. Biogas, for instance, could be inserted, could be locally produced and then inserted back into the gas network, and also hydrogen produced by resin electricity and then inserted into the gas network to be transported and used elsewhere in other places. Overall, an integrated energy system planning will improve security of supply and system resilience, and then the demand sector is an important source of flexibility in such a system, especially in the power system. And here is what we foresee that digitalization will play an important role, as I have mentioned. And then the overall integration of local and mainly renewable energy resources in the system could basically improve security of supply overall. And as a bullet here, also to take into consideration to look beyond the energy sector, we're talking about water, but both as water needs for the power sector, but also integration overall with the water, the energy water nexus, and also taking into account the risks of hydro operation because of climate change, of the more frequent appearance of droughts, and so on. So within this project also, we're planning to formulate the energy modeling unit. So based on utilizing these tools that can basically provide the power to do an integrated energy system planning, there's this the project will set up an energy modeling unit, which will be able to basically perform basic analysis and analyze alternative scenarios and perform publications in the form of annual energy outlooks of the energy system overall, which would be a very useful background in order to see how the energy transition can take place overall in a medium to long-term horizon. So thank you very much for your attention, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, George, for a very informative presentation, and thank you for pointing the importance of integrating digitalization in the ICT sector with the energy sector, which could play a crucial role, specifically, as you mentioned, that energy transition is towards the concept of prosumer, which is basically consumer not just become a consumer of energy, but energy will move in two directions, from utility to customer and from customers to utility, which shows how the intimate relation is being developed. Also pointing out the importance that renewable energy integration is not just a challenge for the energy sector, it's a challenge for all sectors, like waste to energy, which is waste sector, how we could have biofuels and from waste, which could be used, how we could use distributed renewable energy system. I attract your attention that we have both chat box and Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please forward any question you believe you would like to clarify from our speakers, and we will present this or have a Q&A session by the end of our webinar today. I excuse you to make our slide change in the agenda. We will request Dr. Medhat Nafi to present his presentation, as he has an urgent commitment. So I appreciate of our speakers allow me to ask Dr. Nafi to provide his presentation. Dr. Nafi, he was the executive chairman of the Metallurgical Industries Holding Company, which is the largest state-owned holding company of its kind, with 15 subsidiaries and 3.2 billion paid in capital. He was the chairman of the Benin Institute for Metallurgical Studies, as well as board member of Helwan for Fertilizers. Dr. Nafi is an economic expert at the Egyptian Economic Court, adjunct instructor for finance and investment at the Arab Academy for Science, Technology, and Maritime Transport, and the Modern Science and Art University, MSA, as well as Mast University. He is a faculty board member at Misr International University, economic advisor for NADA Foundation for Road Safety, and columnist at different Egyptian periodicals. Dr. Nafi got his PhD in economics from the Faculty of Economics and Political Science, Cairo University. Also, he's a book writer and published several papers. He author of a book titled Risk Management Theory and Application, which has been published in 2011, as well as he's also a novel writer, as well as author and co-author of various economic papers published by IDSC. Dr. Nafa will talk to us about the greening, energy transition as a part of greening the industry in Egypt. I would like also to shed the role of Dr. Nafa while he was a chairman of the holding company, his effort to develop a solar field for the aluminum complex at Naga Hammadi to provide energy to the extension, which was planned to be developed in that. And this was one of the leading steps towards greening energy industry and finding alternative energy solutions. Dr. Nafa, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hafiz. I'm very thrilled actually to be part of this distinguished panel, and thank you for the efforts. Thanks, Ms. Marion, also, and the team. I'm sorry for the disturbance I made for the change I made all of a sudden, because I'm advisor to the Minister of Supply, so I'm sometimes you are summoned for an urgent meeting, but I will try to be with you as long as I can, even on the speaker. As usual, I'm invited to give you some insights about the economic and the financial side of the project and of the term that we are actually that I took advantage of it writing my column today, my article today in Shuru, labeled "The Energy Transition." I invite you all to honor me by reading it today. So I'll take you through some few slides about the energy transition as part of greening the industry in Egypt. The presentation that we are about to start will take you through the Egyptian economic outlook, the Egypt economic outlook, contribution of manufacturing industries to the Egyptian economy, industrial sector structural challenges, main challenges actually, energy transition, the domestic perspective, and the outcome expected from the global perspective. Next, please. So Egypt's recent macroeconomic and structural reforms stabilized the economy and have allowed the country to enter the global COVID-19 crisis with improving fiscal and external accounts. The adverse repercussions, of course, of the pandemic have since undermined this recent progress, shedding light on the long-standing challenges. The real growth rates remained positive, but sharply declined from 5.6% in fiscal year 18-19 to 3.6%, and also expected to decline further to 2.3% in the fiscal year 2021. Key sectors such as tourism, manufacturing, that I will focus on it today, canal and oil and gas extractives, continue to be severely impacted by the restrictions on international travel, the slump in demand, and disruptions to supply chain and trade, both domestically and abroad, as you all know. Next, please. International reserves remained relatively ample at $40 billion in January 2021, although still below their pre-crisis peak of $45.5 billion. The unemployment rate declined to 7.2% in the second quarter of the fiscal year 2021, after spiking at 9.6 6 months earlier. The slowing of economic activity is expected also to have adverse social implications, as we all monitoring what is going on. Next, please. So Egypt is expected to slowly start regaining its pre-pandemic growth momentum by the fiscal year 2021 and further to 2022 and 2023. The multidimensional health and economic crisis caused by the pandemic underscored the importance of advancing the human capital agenda, fast-tracking digital transformation and strengthening social protection. Not to mention also the transition, the energy transition, and a second wave of pending reforms designed to unleash private sector activity and address Egypt's long-standing structural challenges is crucial to create better employment opportunities and improve livelihood. The graph that I'm showing to you, it's from the Egyptian Center for Economic, back. Okay, you have noticed the improvement that is expected with the pandemic having better repercussions. Okay, share of manufacturing industries. It is very important to know that manufacturing industries represent 16.2% of the GDP of the Egyptian GDP in 2018-2019. Its share in investment scored 11.8% same year, and in employment it represented almost 12.4% in the third quarter of 2019. The share of, I'm shedding light here on the manufacturing industries because we are focusing on the manufacturing industries as I was asked to focus on the manufacturing and the impact of energy transition on this very important and crucial sector that I had the honor actually to work in it for a long time. The share of manufacturing exports in total exports 2018 is 57%, and in total imports is 66%. Female share of total workers in manufacturing, so that to see the gender equality or inequality actually in the third quarter of 2019 is 6.4%. Next, please. So I'm taking you to the factors, the main factors controlling the manufacturing sector, the industrial sector at large, with specific interest with the manufacturing sector, the heavy consuming sector, of course. Exchange rate policy. Prior to flotation, as you all know, the scarcity of foreign currency was the main issue for the industrial sector and for many other sectors, of course, like the tourism and commercial, versus the uncertainty and fluctuation in the post-flotation period. So post-flotation, we are subject to fluctuations, we are subject to uncertainty in the exchange rate, and since we cannot be very comfortable with the full free flotation, which is not really exercised, so we are still alert for a next wave maybe of flotation, a next way of freeing the exchange rate a little bit. And this is a problem for the industrial sector because most of the industrial inputs and raw materials are imported from abroad. So access to finance also is an issue. It's always an issue, especially in Egypt, under performing capital market, so that access to finance through issuing bonds, for example, is not efficient. Some of our panels also can tell you that even the equity market, and by raising capital through equity market, it is not also that efficient. So we go to banks, and the banking sector is a little bit risk averse since it is making a lot of money from investing in the bonds and the bills, the sovereign bonds and bills, with a risk-free. It's a risk-free experience, and a lot of money achieved through this lucrative investment. So access to finance is an issue. And we have also to think about access to finance when we try to convince and persuade people to have this transition that we are talking about. Energy prices also, subsidies removal since 2018, and the concept of cross-subsidies that I call a Robin Hood subsidy that you take from the rich and give the poor, actually is making a lot of issues. For example, in the heavy industries, and I've witnessed a lot of problems with the aluminum complex. One piastre increase in the price of electricity for Naga Hammadi means 50 million Egyptian pound end of the year. So you can see the damage of having a huge margin, profit margin for the Egyptian electricity holding company by increasing the price of the kilowatt per hour from 72 piastres, the actual cost, to 110 piastres. Each piastre cost the Naga Hammadi complex 50 million Egyptian pounds. That is cross-subsidizing the other sectors, the individual, for example. And this cross-subsidy is actually a disguised taxes. And I wonder if the company can have the sovereign power of imposing taxes on the sector. So this is an issue. Qualified labor force also is a very eminent issue in this sector, and we will not talk about it today, but technical education and overseas job training highly required in this matter. Next, please. So as we said before, in 2018, the Egyptian government began rolling back the country's substantial energy and subsidies. This contributed to an increase in fuel prices and resulted in renewed demand energy efficiency services in Egypt's industrial sector. However, I mentioned here CDC achievement, great achievement actually, on energy saving, which we consider the first step in industrial sector. I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, you are the expert, but we consider the energy efficiency program as step one before we go to renewables. So in step one, CDC achieved a lot of savings, 40,000 megawatts, slashing energy costs by over $550,000 per annum, and reducing 100,000 tons of carbon emissions, improving its carbon footprint by partnering with UNIDO program launched since 2013. And I'm mentioning here the date because it's amazing that these kind of programs did not work efficiently during crisis. So post the next revolution wave, or the next wave of revolution in Egypt, it was very hard to work in this in the society, telling people you need to you need to improve first your carbon emissions, to decrease your carbon emissions. You need to have to be enrolled in our programs. And if you go to the NIDO program, they will tell you how they struggled with this program at that time. So when the improvements in the Egyptian economy started to reap some fruits, we found this improvements in the industrial sector and with the corporate performance. So next step after achieving energy efficiency, as I told you, is migration to renewable, solar energy, wind, hydraulic, lithium-ion batteries, rechargeable batteries, and electrification. And this electrification, this term is very tricky, and you are the experts, as I told you. So as I told before, so the electrification, if it is not, if the electricity is not generated from renewable resources, case in Egypt, because only, as you know, only 2% is from solar energy, etc. So the electrification, if it electrification or green hydrogen technologies, If not, the electricity is generated and used in the green hydrogen technology or in generating electricity. If they are fossil oil and the high emission, the carbon emission sources, as the case in Egypt, we have a great problem. We do not have this transition or this renewable transition correctly. So next, please. COVID-19 repercussions put survival measures on top of priorities for both individuals and institutions. So any energy transition plan that does not include cost reduction or stop loss shall not be introduced before 2023. That's why we will have look at the outcome, how we convey the market and how we educate people and raise the awareness about the outcome, positive outcome actually of this transition. Government support in form of tax exemptions, cash subsidies, insurance benefits, easier and more efficient transactions is highly needed for this transition. So, for example, of cash subsidies, I had the honor of signing the first EV car to be manufactured, assembled and partially manufactured at Nasco, Nasr. So this EV car will not be introduced to the market without having this $6,000 equivalent to $6,000 cash back to consumers through the OEMR or through the manufacturer itself. It doesn't matter. It must go to the market in order to have this EV competitive in the automotive market in Egypt and everywhere. And so this is a logic. Renewable power installations could perform actually key component of economic stimulus package in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next, please. So that's why we have this global perspective, because from these figures that I'm going to, that you can all read actually, I'm going to present, these figures tell us a lot about how what Dr. Hafiz was saying in his opening, how this technology became cheaper and cheaper and became more efficient in utilization. So solar and wind power costs have continued to fall. I got these numbers from IRENA. The more mature bioenergy, geothermal and hydropower technology. Solar PVs, for example, shows the sharpest cost decline over the period 2010-2019 at 82%, followed by the CSP at 47%, the onshore wind generated at 40%, and offshore wind at 29%. So this is the cost fall down, the cost reduction made in such technologies that started to be very expensive, and now it is more and more cheap. Electricity costs for utility scale, of course, solar PV, fell 13% year on year, reaching nearly 7 cents US dollar cent per kilowatt hour in 2019, and it is expected actually to reach almost 3 cents US dollar cent by 2025. The onshore and offshore wind both fell about 9% year on year, reaching 5 cents and 11 cents respectively for newly commissioned projects. So costs for CSP is still the least developed among solar and wind technologies. It only fell by 1% to 18 cents. Next, please. This is also a very good example. By replacing the cost list 500 gigawatts of coal capacity with solar and wind would cut annual system costs by up to $23 billion per year, and yield a stimulus worth to $940 billion, or around 1% of the global GDP. These numbers should be conveyed to the Egyptian market in the right way. Replacing the costliest coal capacity with renewables would also reduce annual carbon dioxide emissions by around 1.8 gigatons, 5% of last year's global total emissions. So by 2021, up to 1,200 gigawatts of existing coal-fired capacity would cost more to operate than a new utility-scale solar PV would cost to install. And you all know that installation cost is the highest. So continuing cost decline confirm the need for renewable power and a low-cost climate and decarbonization solution, aligning short-term economic needs with medium and long-term sustainable development goals. Next, please. I think we have done it. So this is the last slide. Thank you so much for having me again, and I'm open for any discussions and questions regarding these matters. And also, it is worth mentioning that the green bonds, green sovereign bonds that will be issued by that issued already by the Egyptian government is doing well in the foreign market, and we look further to have this sovereign sukuk also greenish a little bit. We can do it because the sovereign sukuk legislation has passed through the parliament a few days ago, and utilities are highly dependent on such kind of products or financial products. So it is important to have this sukuk not only Sharia compliant, but also compliant with the ESG, the environment and the social responsibility and the corporate government requirements. The pillars, they are the main pillars, as you all know, the main pillars of sustainable development and the main pillars of the SDGs introduced in 2015 by the World Bank. Thank you so much, and sorry for taking longer time.
Thank you, Dr. Nafa, for the very interesting presentation. Actually, some of the numbers you mentioned really looked shocking for me, like 6.4% for female jobs in, I believe, is that for industry at large or for metallurgical study? Because I believe not many female prefer to go to work for iron and steel facility, but I believe for textile, food industries, I have did several energy audits and realized that there is many female workers. So this may be a question, is that only restricted for the metallurgical studies?
No, the manufacturing.
Industry at large.
The manufacturing industry. Manufacturing. And distorted, of course, by the big biasness in the metallurgical and the gas, oil and gas, and etc. But of course, the weaving is much better.
Yes, I think we need to do some effort to increase this share. Also, I like very much the expression you use it of Robin Hood subsidy. Basically, although cross subsidy kind of might be ethically accepted, yet it's not legally accepted, because this is, as you mentioned, is an implicit tax, specifically if we apply to a producing or sectors. Maybe in Europe, it's vice versa, that maybe the residential sector who cross-subsidize the manufacturing sector. Anyway, cross-subsidy should be a state responsibility, not a customer responsibility, which, as you mentioned, has an impact on the financial viability. And also, I think we need to think about commercializing the integration process. I remember when we have a short-term power supply, one of the proposals is to coordinate the daily and annual maintenance of manufacturing facility with the operation of the power system. And we commercialize it and even came out of the electricity law in a form of what we call it interruptible power contracts. So I think even we need to think about how we could commercialize this integration process. So it's not be just on a command and control or bring people together, forcing people to sit together, but creating a commercial attractiveness and commercial contracts which encourage the sector to integrate with each other. Finally, I thank you for pointing out the point of green bonds and Sukuk, new approach for financing, because I believe integrating also the energy sector, industrial sector with the financial sector, which is a go by the, without saying is a very much important. I may have a question because maybe Dr. Nafa might not be able to stay with us till the end of our meeting. A question from Professor Khalil about, does integration process include solar process heating for industries? It's not just a PV, other heating processes using renewable energy. Is there some experiments or some projects about this, Dr. Nafa?
Yes, that's why I was explaining how tricky is the electrification term that is heavily used, and the green hydrogen technology that were heavily used in the past few days, because as you know, in this technology, when you are trying to separate hydrogen using conventional methods, using solar and using petroleum, using natural gas, you are still in the middle of high emissions. And that's why even the heating process should be also going renewable, should be also using renewable sources such as the solar technology in this regard. Still, we have been trying with the Intag al-Harbi, the military production ministry, to localize the PVs, the PV manufacturing in Egypt, and still the most costliest part of this production cannot be localized efficiently in the current days. But most of the operations, the process can be done here in Edfu, for example, and we started actually to build the factory for this purpose. Among which the heating technology using the solar energy is also considered.
Thank you, Dr. Nafa, for this clarification. And I believe Dr. Nafa pointed also a very important point about the integration between energy and industry is not just in an energy, but also industry produces energy or localized production for energy equipment. And I believe this is very much important to be considered. Thank you, Dr. Nafa. And we might switch to our next presenter. Excuse me. Hani?
Yes, Dr. Hafiz?
Actually, explanation will be yes. Our next presentation will be delivered by Mr. Helmi Abu Laish. He is the CEO of Cecum initiative in Egypt. Mr. Helmi Abu Laish is deeply involved in Cecum since it was founded. Cecum promotes sustainable development in ecology, economy, social and cultural life. The Cecum holding produces, processes, and markets organic and biodynamic foodstuff, textiles, herbal medicine in Egypt and internationally. They also operate educational and medical facilities as well as various cultural programs. So it's a comprehensive and new community initiative, basically. Cecum is regarded as the Egyptian pioneer in organic farming and was awarded the Right Livelihood Award in 2003 under the stewardship of Helm Abu Laish. Mr. Abu Laish was the chairman of the Industrial Development Center at the Ministry of Industry and Trade. He studied economics and marketing and was for a long time campaigning in national and international politics to promote responsible competitiveness, social entrepreneurship, and tackling the greatest challenge of 21st century. Mr. Abu Laish will talk to us about agricultural trend and its impact on energy demand and climate. Mr. Abu Laish, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hafiz. Thank you for the nice introduction, and I'm happy to quickly share with you and the panelists, my fellow panelists, and the audience, some experience from the agricultural sector of Cecum on the questions of renewable energy and decarbonization and so on. But let me start with a quick introduction to Cecum, which is considered, as you rightly said, a miracle in the desert. And the question often is, why is it considered a miracle in the desert? And it all starts basically with my late father, Ibrahim Abu Laish, who established Cecum in 1977 with a very bold dream, a dream to set up a sustainable community in the desert where people can unfold their potential, live together in dignity and transparency, and perform economic activities in accordance with ecological and ethical principles. And this was for him organic farming, this was for him economy of love, as he called it. This was for him caring for schooling, capacity building, and for the people of the community. And you may imagine that then in 1977, friends, family, everyone told him this is never going to happen. There is no community in the desert, there's no organic farming in the desert, there's nothing called economy of love, there's all these kind of dreams, forget about them. And this is why Cecum nowadays is considered a miracle in the desert, because against all odds, what has unfolded over the last 40 years is a miracle when out of desert, a wonderful oasis has been developed where nowadays all kinds of crops and animals and ecosystems can be visited and watched, where 2,000 people work, learn and live together, and hundreds of kids go to schools, 3,000 students go to our Heliopolis University of Sustainable Development, 30,000 people in the area go to our hospital, and products, organic products, are sold to nearly everyone in Egypt under the brand of Isis, Cecum, Athos, and so on. So why this was possible is another question for another day. What I want to point your attention on is that based on this miracle in the desert, in 2017, when my father passed away at the age of 80, we, the Future Council of Cecum, we came together to say, what is Cecum's next miracle? Basically, we decided that Cecum, over the next 40 years, wants to focus on disseminating our model, our ideas into Egypt's society and community, and take our models to the simple farmers and people everywhere in the villages of Egypt. So we developed what we call the Cecum Vision Goals for Egypt 2057 for the next 40 years, 18 of them. I will not go through all of them. I want just to mention that we envision that Egypt in 2057 will be on its ecological life based on 100% organic agriculture, on 100% renewable energy, and Egypt will be climate neutral, at least, if not climate positive. So now this is, again, seems a mission impossible, seems a dream, but we have embarked in 2019 on a model farm in Wahat al-Bahariya, which is the Cecum Wahat farm, on about 2,500 acres. And I want now just to share with you some of the key results of this 1.5 to 2 years endeavor now in this farm in Wahat al-Bahariya, by mentioning, for example, that when we have now over 2 years reclaimed 1,210 fadan of desert into, let's say, cultivated land, at the same time, we are sequestering now by every year 1,936 tons of carbon in this soil, in this 1,210 fadan. And for all of you who know that Egypt's average consumption per capita is about 3 tons, this means that our soils in this farm sequester nowadays the equivalent of what 600 Egyptians are emitting. At the same time, we also use compost, of course, the black gold of farmers in Egypt in this farm. And we produce about 7,000 tons of compost for this area. And this 7,000 tons, again, avoid the emission of methane equivalent to 4,200 tons of carbon, which means that there are another 4,200 carbon credits equaling about the usage of 1,400 Egyptians per year. So this is all numbers for 1 year, for the year 2021, on this one farm, 1,200 fadan. Let's go on and just mention that we also started a biogas project there because we want to produce our own biogas from our own liquid animal manure, which we then use for heating, cooking, and so on, and for fertilization. We don't have numbers yet. I'm happy to share them with you as soon as we have them. Then we move on. We said this farm, this 2,400 acres, will ultimately in 2027 will be home of 1 million trees, which is our target to grow there 1 million trees on this farm. And we have established now nearly 170,000 trees already in these last 2 years. And they sequester 30 kilos per tree, about 5,598 tons of carbon per year. And again, this is a number equaling the emission of 1,900 Egyptians, average emission of 1,900 Egyptians. And if we go on, of course, we use there in this farm our own solar photovoltaic modules, which we have, together with the our Heliopolis University, established and designed and installed. And we have installed over the last 1.5 years 1.6 mega, 1,638 kilowatt of photovoltaic modules in this farm. And this is equaling avoidance of diesel generation of about 2,212 tons of carbon emissions. So another 2,212 tons of carbon, which equals what 800 Egyptians are emitting per year. And of course, and we have heard this now, we use photovoltaic and solar water heaters for our housing, for the 120 people who live there now, for the 200 people who will live there in the end of this year. All of their housing is secured with renewable energy. We are off-grid, obviously, so we have no other alternative. But at the same time, just to repeat and revamp and summarize, this means on 1,200 fadan, we can sequester carbon equaling the emissions of 4,700 Egyptians. What does this leave us with for the agricultural sector in Egypt? And if we consider 7 to 8 million acres of arable land in Egypt, this means that the agricultural sector alone can sequester carbon for 28 million Egyptians. And this is, by luck, more or less the number of people working in the agricultural sector. So at least the agricultural sector, this is the example, this is what I want to state, can be carbon neutral by applying just the same concepts. And finally, just because of competitiveness and pricing, I want to mention that, of course, using renewable energy in off-grid situations in land reclamation is much, much cheaper than diesel generation and even cheaper than government electricity. It just needs more years to pay back. So it's not only a very nice solution for environment and sustainable development, but it's also a very economically viable position for farmers, especially in desert land reclamation. But we started just recently with thousands of our biodynamic farmers all over Egypt to also change their diesel generators for irrigation in the Nile Delta to renewable energy, which is still a viable option and improves their profitability and competitiveness. So just to sum up, I would like to use a quote of a very well-known German poet called Goethe, who once said, "Knowing is not enough, we must apply, and willing is not enough, we must do." And in this spirit, I think miracles like Cecum can be duplicated, multiplied, improved on everywhere in the world, especially in Egypt. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abulayesh, actually, for very enlightening presentation. Actually, what you mentioned about integration, basically you presented integration from more wider scopes than we really discussing, which you integrated energy, agriculture, health, social, education in this new community, which I have seen it. Yeah, I'm witness for what you already said. Really, it's an excellent experiment, and I believe it's not experiments fully matured, I believe, but I mean, it's very much need to be looked from a national perspective and being a kind of a part of our future policies for development. Also, having composting, biogas production, and selling carbon credit or saving carbon. I think this is what I was meaning when I talk about we need to commercialize integration, creating tools like green certificates. We have presented guarantee of origin certificates or green certification system, and how it could be used to create or improve such kind of integration. Solar pumping, I believe it's a very good approach, specifically when we talk about reclamation in deserts, carbon neutrality, and having the agriculture sector as a carbon neutral. We have a question, I believe it's an urgent question from Mr. Amr Khairi to Mr. Abulayesh about, may you please highlight on the water consumption on Al Wahat farm. As you know, the underground water in the Western Desert is finite. What are Cecum measures to minimize water losses? Mr. Abulayesh?
This is obviously part of our Cecum vision goals for a sustainable water management, that we work on many different levels on the issue of water usage. Yes, we know that we are sitting on the Nubian aquifer, and also it's a huge aquifer, equaling 1,500 years of Nile water. It's still considered fossil. And hence, what we are doing is we are selecting, obviously, plants which do not use heavy water to transfer it into production. So we are using medicinal herbs in the first place, which use low water inputs. We are experimenting with medicinal herbs like moringa, senne, and other plants which do not need irrigation, which extract their water from the air. And we are also, in regard to our trees, trying now to experiment with a whole lot of trees which do not need irrigation at all. So what I can tell you is that we are very aware about this issue. We are trying to measure our consumption on every single well, every single plot, every single pivot, and all the crops we produce, to make sure that we optimize the water which we extract from below the soil in the most efficient way, and reduce consumption as much as we can.
Thank you, Mr. Abulayesh. I think this may lead us to our next presentation, which is about water and energy nexus, which will be presented by Dr. Khaled Abu Zaid. Professor Abu Zaid carries a PhD in civil engineering from Colorado State University. USA. He has over 30 years of experience. He is in charge of several international and regional positions. He is a water director at Sidari Regional Center, the technical secretariat officer in charge at the North African Ministers' Councils on Water, director of technical programs at the Arab Water Council, and Secretary General of the Egyptian Water Partnership, and many other international posts. He was the team leader of the Nile Basin Decision Support System Conceptual Design, Arab State of Water reports. He authored several publications on water, energy, food nexus in the Arab region. He developed the 2050 water resource policy options for Egypt and was a team leader for developing Egypt 2030 wastewater reuse vision and strategy. Dr. Abu Zaid, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hafiz, for this introduction. I am really honored to be among this distinguished panelists and to join this webinar. As mentioned, I will be talking about the water energy nexus in Egypt. As you might know, of course, Egypt is the most downstream country in the Nile Basin with 11 Nile Basin countries. The map in front of you shows the rainfall on the 11 countries. As you can see, rainfall almost stops in the middle of Sudan, and the northern part of Sudan and Egypt is almost dry and depends mainly on the Nile River itself, which is the drainage of this rainfall that falls on the upstream Nile countries. The Nile Basin countries as a whole receive about 7,000 billion cubic meters per year, but the Nile Basin within these countries receive about 1,660 billion cubic meters per year of annual rainfall, of course, and this is on average. Egypt uses out of this 55.5 billion cubic meters per year. The map illustrates how Egypt depends mainly on the Nile. 94% of Egypt is desert, and only about 6% is this green valley of the Nile with the Nile Delta in the most downstream part. So the Nile River is the main source of water for Egypt. Of course, this water flows by gravity, so it doesn't need energy to flow downstream to Egypt. And this is an advantage that could not be replaced by any other resource, which will require a lot of energy to produce, such as desalination, groundwater development, any other resource, even wastewater use. So this shows the importance of the Nile to Egypt. If we look at the water scarcity impact on energy, and here I want to show this graph, which is the per capita share. The increase in population in red shows the population that increases from 1970 until even into the future. In 2050, when the population of Egypt will reach about 200 million people. And this translates into a per capita share of renewable water resources that is diminishing with time. If we take the 55.5 billion cubic meters per year, plus maybe 1.5 billion cubic meters of rainfall or so, and this represents the renewable fresh water, and divide that by the population, we get the per capita share of renewable freshwater resources. So this we will see in blue here as a diminishing share. As you might know that the international level of water scarcity is about 1,000 cubic meters per person per year. And in about 1990, the per capita share dropped below this water scarcity limit. It keeps dropping, and almost we are now close to what is called the water poverty or the severe water scarcity limit of 500 cubic meters per capita per year. And in a year or so, we will be below this water poverty line or severe water scarcity line. We are now about maybe 550 or so cubic meters per capita per year. Sorry about this interruption. If we move to the fossil energy, of course, this reduction in fresh water, renewable water resources translates into an additional need for energy. And one source of non-conventional water resources is the fossil groundwater, the non-renewable groundwater that is present in the deserts of Egypt. And of course, to pump this water, at least until recently, fossil energy is used to do that. And here you can see the linkage between the two. If you look at the Arab region, for instance, 24 billion cubic meters per year of fossil non-renewable groundwater is putting more pressure on pumping this groundwater, and this impossible sustainability of these two fossil reserves call for a dire attention to the nexus and the linkages between water and energy. Exploitation of non-renewable groundwater due to the unavailability of adequate renewable freshwater resources is a fact, and the high potential for using more energy to make water available. Now, Egypt and many other countries have moved to renewable energy to pump groundwater. And this puts even more pressure on fossil groundwater sustainability, because now energy is going to be is going to be cheaper to pump. And therefore, we have to think about the nexus and the linkages between the energy and the power, because when energy becomes cheaper or more available in the middle of the desert, people might be pumping more water if there are no regulations and strict regulations and strict monitoring of how much is being pumped, and penalties should be put in place to control the pumping of this groundwater, especially when a cheaper energy it will be more available. The other source of water that we'll be looking at is wastewater use. And this is actually a renewable water resource of the future, because as people increase, the water supply for potable purposes increase, and the wastewater coming out of these potable water uses or urban water uses is going to increase. 80% of the urban water supply goes back to wastewater. So we have a resource that is increasing with the increase in population, and with the unavailability of renewable freshwater resource, people will be going more towards wastewater treatment and reuse. And this, of course, has energy implications. It's a potential, I would call it a renewable, increasing water resource for our region and for Egypt, but it is, of course, going to have energy implications, because to treat, you need energy. To treat wastewater, to pump wastewater to these treatment plants, you need energy. And then to pump this treated wastewater for recycling and reuse in other areas, this is going to also need energy. But if we look at the situation of wastewater as of year 2018, about 8 billion cubic meter of wastewater is produced. Of course, not all this water is treated. In red, you have the uncollected, untreated wastewater. In dark blue, you have the secondary treated wastewater. In green, you have the primary treated wastewater, and the tertiary treated wastewater is in this dark green. But you have also the collected but untreated wastewater as well. The forecasts for 2030 is that the current municipal wastewater, which is about 10 billion cubic meters per year in 2018, this is going to increase to cope with the increase in population. So it's going to reach about maybe 15 billion cubic meters per year in 2030. And therefore, the wastewater is also going to increase from 8 to 12 billion cubic meters per year. So you have a potential resource. It is an unconventional resource, but it's going to be important in the future. The plans in the future is to have at least secondary treatment for all the wastewater. This tells us that we might have about 9.7 billion cubic meters of secondary treated wastewater. There will be a part that will still be untreated because it's uncollected, because it is it is treated in a traditional manner, such as septic tanks, because these are scattered communities that are far from one another. They don't necessarily need to have a networked sewage or wastewater system. So they will remain to be treated locally by natural conditions through septic tanks. So this is an amount that we cannot collect. But there will also be a part that is tertiary treated wastewater. And we hope by then, by 2030, we will have, by this figure, show that old wastewater is that the collectible wastewater is actually treated to at least secondary treatment where it could be recycled. And by the way, we have a code in Egypt that specifies 4 levels of waste safely cultivated. We have grade A, B, C, and D, and each one has in the code specific crops that could be cultivated using this particular level of treatment, because vegetables that are cooked are different than vegetables that are not eaten without cooking, that are eaten raw. Of course, fruits with a peel are different than fruits that are eaten without a peel, that have to be peeled. So the code specifies exactly how safely each level of treated wastewater could be used. We have also another direction that the government is going through, which is the treatment of mixed agriculture drainage with wastewater. This is one of the plants called Mahsama, mixed wastewater agriculture drainage reuse treatment plant, where it takes the agriculture drainage from the agriculture drains, which, by the way, includes some of the treated or sometimes partially treated wastewater as well, and then it treats that agriculture mixed drainage and pumps it to agriculture areas for reuse. And here it is very important to mention a nexus, again, another energy water nexus issue, because within these agriculture drains, we sometimes have treated wastewater. And then by this plant or example of a plant, of a treatment plant, we are actually treating the mixture again once more, but that time is because of the agricultural drainage. It's treating more of the agricultural drainage, but it actually might include treated wastewater in there. And this brings us to the question of whether we should be looking at a policy where treated municipal wastewater is used directly because it's already treated. We should not be pumping or draining it or putting it back into agricultural drains and then treating them again. So this is double counting or double treatment. This is double use of energy when we are treating already treated wastewater, but because it have been polluted again by draining it into agricultural drains. So this might leads us to putting policies where maybe if treated wastewater is already treated somewhere, it is better to use it directly than go into the indirect reuse of this treated wastewater through an additional treatment of this particular wastewater when it's mixed with agricultural drainage. So the possibility of this wastewater reuse and treatment also gives us the possibility of generating energy. Sometimes we could also generate energy from wastewater treatment processes. And this adds another variable to the Nexus equation. Of course, municipal and industrial wastewater is a potential because in many times the industrial wastewater is also mixed with the municipal wastewater. It is obvious that wastewater use requires high energy costs, requires to treat, pump, and transport water for recycling. But we should be looking at the direct versus indirect water use, which is an energy nexus question. If we look at another new project, there is another two other similar agriculture mixed drainage treatment plants that are in place. Bahr al-Baqar treatment plant, which is about to be finished, and it will treat about 5.6 million cubic meters per day. And this translates to maybe about 1.5 billion cubic meters per year or so. And also the Hammam treatment plant of agricultural drainage, also mixed with treated wastewater. And we have heard about this project, which is supposed to supply the new Delta and the Egypt Future Agriculture Development Project, which we've heard about. This is the area where this desert area is going to be cultivated using agriculture drainage that is treated, and in addition to some groundwater as well. And of course, the groundwater here in this area is mostly non-renewable. Ones near the Nile Delta are partially renewable, but when you go to the middle of the desert, this groundwater is non-renewable. And here we have several nexuses actually. When we look at this, we have the nexus of using of the water and energy, because this is a challenge. You will be here in the north. We will be treating this agriculture drainage and pumping this water using energy again to these areas to use for cultivation. Right? The canal that will deliver the water is maybe about 120 kilometers. And this here also brings us to the question of whether maybe these yellow treatment plants here that are pouring their treated wastewater into the agriculture drain and then collected up in the north and then treated when it's mixed with agriculture drainage and then bring them back to this area for agriculture. Does this use less energy or more energy than if we would maybe direct the treated wastewater directly from these wastewater treatment plants to these agriculture areas? And this again raises the question of comparing direct to indirect reuse, and also drainage and wastewater to non-renewable groundwater use, which is also using energy to pump as well, but it's non-renewable, which is not sustainable. And it is clean water that may be better for other uses, such as drinking purposes or water bottling or others. If we look at the energy used for developing different types of water resources, this graph here shows how much kilowatt hour per cubic meter is needed to develop water from lakes and rivers, from groundwater, from wastewater treatment, for wastewater reuse, for maybe sophisticated drinking water treatment facilities, and for salt water desalination. And this here shows the different energy costs. If we look at desalination, which is another source that is increasingly being used in Egypt, in 2012, Egypt was developing 200 million cubic meters per year of desalinated water. In 2015, it became 350, and now it's increasing, and in 2030, it will reach at least 1.5 billion cubic meters of desalinated water. Of course, this is a very energy intensive water development, but it will be mainly restricted to the coastal areas where it is close to the shore, close to the sea, and where there will be less energy needed to pump water to far distances, such as cities that are inland, far from coastal areas. So it's a good policy to save energy by limiting the desalination facilities to the coastal areas and looking at other resources for inland communities and inland areas. And this raises the question of what type of water resources should be used for what type of use, agriculture, drinking, industrial uses, and where, coastal areas, inland. And we have to put that in mind and look at the water energy nexus when we're looking at these, answering these questions. A quick comparison of energy requirements of developing different water sources for the purpose of food production, for instance, demonstrates that pumping water from open water bodies, fresh surface water or recycled agricultural drainage water at 0.37 kilowatt hour per cubic meter would be more economical than pumping groundwater, for instance, at a higher energy cost or energy requirement. When renewable fresh water is exploited, reusing treated wastewater at 1.5 to 3.5 kilowatt hours per cubic meter would be more economical than using desalinated water, for instance, at a higher energy requirement. So the policy decisions that are made today will affect the policy decisions that need to be taken in the future. And this is an important factor when it comes to the exploitation of fossil non-renewable groundwater. If we use all the non-renewable groundwater that is available inland, in the deserts, by a high water consumptive use, such as maybe agriculture, future communities which will have to develop and live in these inland areas in the future. We are increasing by 2.5 million, at least, people every year. So in 10 years, we are going to increase by 25 million people. Where are these people going to live? Maybe these new urban communities are going to be in these desert areas, and we are slowly encroaching into these desert areas. The only resource there inland will be the fossil non-renewable groundwater. It will be difficult to look at desalination in the future to provide these areas with water if this water is exploited. Desalination, which will be far, about 200 kilometers maybe in the north, to do it, it will cost not only energy and additional costs for the desalination process itself, but it will require huge amounts of energy to pump this water inland to distances that could reach 200 to 500 kilometers south. So therefore, the decisions that we make today, looking at energy and water, are very important when we are looking at the future. What is the best use for that non-renewable resource, for instance? Should it be allocated to agriculture, a water-intensive user? Or is it better for domestic and drinking water, especially that this water is very clean and doesn't require too much treatment? The Nexus approach provides some insights to these policy decisions that need to be made. Exploiting non-renewable groundwater in agriculture at a very low energy cost will quickly result in the need to make drinking water available at higher energy requirements in the future, at maybe 1.5 to 3.5 kilowatt hour per cubic meter, or even 8.5 or 8.8 kilowatt hour per meter cube if we're looking at desalination. Whereas strategically, using non-renewable groundwater for domestic and drinking purposes will sustain it for a longer period of time. Of course, it is non-renewable, so it is not going to be completely sustainable, but at least for a longer period of time, and will generate wastewater that could be treated and reused for agriculture at energy needs of about 1 to 2.5 kilowatt hours per cubic meter. So we could use here the secondary treated wastewater coming out of the use of non-renewable groundwater for municipal uses and use that for agricultural purposes. This is just an example of a water energy policy decision that, when taken with a Nexus approach, could contribute to energy security by providing a long-term energy efficient alternative. If we look at water for energy also, it is obvious that moving into renewable solar and wind energy would be less water consumptive than fossil fuel extraction and refining, and even hydropower. Hydropower, although it is a clean energy, could be associated with water evaporation and seepage losses if associated with additional open surface water storage. Making use of in-stream turbines for energy production is also important, as well as making use of all water outfalls, be it wastewater outfalls, cooling water outfalls, or irrigation and drainage gravity channels. Using mini hydropower installations could be very useful. I want here to address very quickly the transboundary dimension of the water energy nexus. The transboundary nature of water resources puts another dimension to the water energy nexus, whereby 97% of Egypt's renewable water resources originate outside the country, through the Nile, of course. An upstream infrastructure that may ensure energy security for an upstream country may not only affect water security for a downstream country, but could also affect its energy. Therefore, the hydropower potential at the transboundary river basin level need to be assessed in an integrated manner. So here we don't only want to integrate between the sectors as the subject of this seminar or webinar calls for, but also integration between the different users, between the different countries, especially when it comes to a transboundary river basin. And it should be planned jointly so that upstream hydropower projects do not affect downstream hydropower installations or even other water needs downstream. And the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam impact on Egypt and Sudan is a very important example and the case here in this kind of transboundary water energy security nexus. If we look at the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam being built on the Blue Nile, which is the main tributary to the Nile, and with its first stage filling that filled about 4.9 billion cubic meters of water, as you can see from that lake in front of you, which is not only storing that amount of water, but is also associated with evaporation losses and seepage losses. And knowing and noting that this dam for the first filling is going to reach about 50 billion cubic meters of water, and the operational levels is going to range from this 50 billion to 74 billion cubic meters of water. And as the storage increases, the evaporation increases and the seepage increases, and also in addition to the amount of storage itself, which will range from 50 to 74 billion cubic meters. And in a study that we did, just quickly, I will show you the results. This is 100 years of simulation of the water levels in the High Aswan Dam without the Ethiopian dam in place. You can see that these are the levels in blue. The first level at the top is the level in the Lake Nasser in the High Aswan Dam in Egypt, which in years of drought, this water level dropped very low, where it became very close to the dead storage where the turbines, the hydropower turbines of the High Aswan Dam are in this red line. These 100 years, you can see that the drought years, they repeat themselves here and here. And you can see that if we simulate that the previous 100 years are going to repeat themselves into the future, and that this is year zero of filling, and these are the 100 years of future operations, if the flood is going to repeat itself with the Grand Ethiopian Dam in place, several scenarios were simulated, and they all show that water will drop below the dead storage. And this means that it will affect the shares of Egypt and Sudan, the water usages of Egypt and Sudan for several years, and it may happen in the future when these drought years come. Therefore, that's why you always hear that Sudan and Egypt are calling for a binding agreement to know exactly what is Ethiopia going to do during these years. Is it going to release more water from the storage that it stored so that people can live here downstream or not? But this is not just affecting the water amount. This is one of the scenarios here that shows that in order to keep this line up, shares of Egypt and Sudan might be reduced by 2 to 3 billion cubic meters per year and in water amounts. But if we look at the energy, and this here shows the impact on energy, and this is an inevitable impact, that the levels of the High Aswan Dam are going to drop from the green level to the lower level, and these are different scenarios. And this here translates to a drop of about 10 meters to 10 to 12 meters in the average level of the High Aswan Dam. And this is going to definitely affect the energy production from the High Aswan Dam by maybe 25% or so. So the water nexus is also important to address from the water saving. We hear about water saving projects such as drip irrigation and sprinkler irrigation, and converting from gravity surface irrigation to pressurized systems, which is another important issue. It is important to consider an objective of overall water use efficiency coupled with an energy use efficiency, rather than just looking at on-farm irrigation efficiency in isolation. The overall water use efficiency, considering the water use factor, is important. It's obvious that higher energy will be needed when we are looking at higher water savings, because all these pressurized systems will need higher energy. The other aspect also, which is important in the Nexus, is the virtual water trade when it comes to food, for instance. Egypt is actually importing, as of year 2015, about 49 billion cubic meters per year of virtual water in food. It's almost equal to Egypt's uses from the Nile. So we need double the Nile if Egypt wants to be food self-sufficient, for instance, as of the current population, not to mention the increasing population. If Egypt would to produce this food locally, if it had the water resources, it will need a huge amount of energy as well to pump this water to cultivate this amount. So this virtual water trade and the dependency on importing what could be cultivated at lower energy costs, rain-fed agriculture somewhere else, and maybe countries that have water abundance, and cultivate what is high cost cash. Uses, I think, the strategy that is for to touch upon what is called the blue water and the green water, and also the effect of that on the Nexus. This is a little bit related to rain-fed agriculture. Rain-fed agriculture is using green water, what we call green water, because it is water that is contributing directly to green cover through rain-fed agriculture. And of course, this uses much less energy than rivers or from abstraction of groundwater. So whenever it's possible, of course, Egypt has almost no rainfall, but whenever it's possible, is available, there we could also use that for rain-fed agriculture using green water, which will be less energy
Dr. Khalid, it seems we have an internet interruption. I hope you almost concluded your speech. I'm not sure what has been left. Actually, it's very informative information. I may switch directly to Dr. Ghada Barsoum. She left already. Unfortunately, Dr. Ghada Barsoum has a commitment at 12 o'clock, so she left. And I think we will work with her later to get her reflections and try to provide some conclusion about the meeting. But I would say that the presentation of Dr. Khaled Abu Zaid was quite enlightening presentation. Really, it raised a lot of an important point. One of the main point is that availability of energy sometimes might lead to a kind of misuse for water pumping. So solar water pumping lead in some desert area to over pump water, and this lead a kind of a very keen regulation, specifically if this water is not renewable water. Also, he mentioned the importance of the hierarchy of water reuse, such as using water from freshwater sources, then reuse water, and by the end we should go to water desalination. And so we shouldn't break this kind of hierarchy considering the water quality. Also, he mentioned about reuse of water. We shouldn't use treated water and discharge it to canals where it's being retreated again when we treat drainage water. So this kind of a management of the process should take into consideration. Also, I thank him very much for pointing out the outboundary water supply and how it could have an impact on not just water, but also energy. There is a direct impact on effect on the water level at Lake Nasser, so direct generation, as well as it will have an impact on more intensified water treatment for water reuse. So it's not just direct impact, also it has an indirect impact, which also should be considered into taken into consideration. So it's not just that water issues are not just like so many terawatt which we're going to be lost from the high dam and Aswan Dam, but also it includes an intensive need for water, either for treating wastewater for reuse or for water desalination. So this also should be taken into the damage which could be Egypt could be facing as a result of this. Thank you very much, Dr. Khaled. We have some questions, but maybe I prefer to move to Dr. Gendi for his presentation and keep question. I appreciate if Dr. Khaled could stay with us. Because we received many questions to him, because he raised a lot of very important points and he should even some of very hot topics. So I think I appreciate if Dr. Khaled could stay with us after presentation of Dr. Gendi and Dr. Tariq. Dr. Ahmed Al-Gendi is a power system expert with an established knowledge of renewable energy and energy efficiency industries, the structure of the German and Egyptian electricity sectors, and their governing regulatory frameworks. Dr. Gendi is the co-founder partner of the deep technical startup Nexus Analytica, which has been established in 2019. Also, he is a university lecturer at the German University in Cairo at the Mechatronic department. Prior to founding Nexus Analytica, Dr. Gendi was development advisor for renewable energy and energy efficiency and emerging technology at the German Development Cooperation, GIZ, in Egypt. Dr. Gendi received a PhD degree at the University of Munich. Prior to his PhD, Dr. Gendi worked as a project engineer, power plant automation at a 450 megawatt combined cycle thermal power plant in Munich, Germany, owned by Munich City Utilities. Dr. El-Gendi will talk to us about developments in transportation sector and their impact on energy planning. Dr. El-Gendi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Hafiz, for the thorough introduction, and thanks for all the panelists for their thorough discussion so far. I know that we're a bit late on time, so I'll try to be as short as possible with my presentation. I hope first everyone can see it.
Yes, we can see it, yes.
Great. So far we have seen multiple discussions with regards to the sectoral coupling and aspects. First, I want to give a brief introduction about our company and what we're doing. We've been established, as Dr. Hafiz said, in 2019, and we're focusing on three different aspects, focused on strategic consultancy, modeling and simulation, and developing of specific models on the macro and the micro levels, and development of specific in-house solutions which are related to big data analytics. Although we're a very small startup, which started very recently in 2019, we've been heavily engaging in various aspects within the sector, developing various products and developing various successful projects in the sector. We're focusing on various thematic topics which are primarily engaged with the elements related to the energy sector disruption and the energy transitions, covering energy policies and regulations, energy markets, electromobility, big data analytics, power to X or the sector coupling issues focused on green hydrogen, the integration of renewable energies, control of conventional power plants, and the aspects of the energy management of the electricity sector. And we, as I said, we've been working with a variety of customers, not only within the Egyptian sector, but as well outreaching for African countries, like the development of the national e-mobility strategy in Botswana, and the development of various aspects related to the e-mobility strategies for Morocco and Jordan and the Egyptian sector, which will start with the World Bank very shortly. Jumping into the initial topic of the energy disruption aspect, in the initial presentation, we've seen that there is this sort of sector decoupling between the electricity sector and the oil and gas sector, where the mobility sector is primarily powered using fossil fuels from the oil and gas. And we have the electricity consumers considering the household, residential, and commercial customers having the electricity loads coming directly from the generation, transmission, and distribution systems. The point is the assets for these power generation aspects were designed only to meet this traditional electricity consumers. And now we're trying to consider different aspects related to how to migrate and couple these two different sectors together. The question rises, why do we actually want to do that, or what's motivation behind it? One primary motivation is related to the global CO2 emissions, which we will look at in 2020. Nearly 23% are just coming from the transportation sector, another 23% coming from the industrial sector, and 40% coming from the energy sector itself, giving the reliance on conventional power plants powered by fossil fuels. This sort of increase in the global CO2 emissions have led to various worldwide measures, which including more reliance on renewable energy sources, trying to electrify the transportation sector, where we have seen a steady growth in the EV stocks since 2016, growth with an exponential growth and now reaching up to more than 10 million electric vehicles. This sort of challenge within the sector would raise various questions how the electricity sector will be capable to accommodate this sort of new loads or customers within its distribution and transmission networks, given that these systems, as we've said, were not really designed to accommodate these sort of loads, which will have various implications in terms of the power quality and the accommodation of these different technologies. This sort of motivation have led to various countries in the region to investigate this topic. Egypt is in fact one of the leading countries within the North African market with regard to the exploitation of the sector. If you look at Tunisia, Algeria, and Libya, they're still trying to investigate the topic, however, with no policy data available or no clear initiative or strategic direction. With regard to the case of Morocco, they have been investigating the topic quite recently. However, when we look at the Egyptian side itself, we have various market dynamics which started initially in 2018 when we issued the first presidential decree which allowed the exemption of AVs from customs duties. And then this was enlarged to allow the exporting of electric vehicle as used cars up to 3 years of the date of manufacturing, which was not really something we've seen previously in conventional electric internal combustion engine, which the owners will have to be the first owner in order to export the vehicle. In 2019, we started to see more penetration of charging point operators, with 3 to 4 companies starting to establish a local public station infrastructure. There are currently 50 charging locations with more than 50 150 charging points in Egypt. This number have been going up and forth because the aspects which we have that have been no clear regulatory framework involving the tariff structure or the ability for charging point operators to sell electricity to those users. And we had the element of the licensing of electric vehicles because until 2020, actually until late 2020, there have been no specific regulation from the traffic authority, which allowed people to authorize their vehicles on the streets, and they had to renew it on monthly basis, which was a very hectic issue for the owners. Starting in 2021, we're starting to see a dip involved by the government through primarily the Ministry of Public Business Sector and the reviving of the Nasr company factories. There is a very deep focus on local manufacturing, where the market will start to see locally manufactured vehicles. However, we've seen some pushback with regard to the Decree 255/2018, which was cancelled very recently, 2 weeks ago, which now does not allow any importing of used vehicles unless the user is the first owner. And this will start to seeing some pushback from the market growth in the next upcoming years. With regard to a more qualitative macro overview on the country, because obviously we said within the North African region, Egypt is really well established with regards to the strategic direction it has. Although the strategy is not officially available, there have been multiple public statements by the Ministry of Military Production, which showcases various strategic figures which they would like to achieve within a time horizon until 2040. Looking specifically at 2035, we anticipate the total number of sales of new vehicles to be sold using electric vehicles and jumping up to 50% by 2040. The main pillar which the ministry is looking at specifically is the local manufacturing aspect, where they are trying to reach up to 65% with an industrialization share for a manufactured vehicle. Some environmental targets, with coordination with the Ministry of Environment. They're trying to reduce the health and environmental risk by 97%. And together with the Ministry of Trade and the Ministry of Finance, they're trying to increase the industrial production to increase the contribution by the DGP up to 5%. And this strategy is divided into 3 different phases. The current phase we're locating as is trying to promote the usage of EV and encourage local manufacturing. So we already have seen various initiatives in this direction, given the recent decrees and the involvement of the Ministry of Public Business Sector. The upcoming phase would focus primarily on the role of the R&D and the deepening the role of manufacturing. And finally, the main primary vision is to be a regional exporter for electric vehicles to the region. And it's a very ambitious target, which hopefully we will be able to see within the Egyptian sector. The strategy itself is built upon 3 specific pillars. The local manufacturing aspect is the one which is having a primary focus at the moment. The other pillar is related to the charging infrastructure. We've seen actually very recently in a statement by the Ministry of Public Business Sector, His Excellency Hisham Tawfiq, that there will be an involvement from the government to establish nearly 3,000 charging stations, which will be owned by the government and somehow operated by the private sector as well. There are some other plans with the governmental sector to rehabilitate the existing fleet by the usage of electric vehicles and other sources of energy efficient solution, like, for example, liquefied natural gas. However, given the short time for our presentation, I will be focusing primarily today only on electric vehicles and battery electric vehicles in specific, although there are other initiatives related to, as we said, natural gas, and as well the usage of green hydrogen in order to empower the electrification fleet. Looking into the market itself and the different stakeholders which are placed within the ecosystem, we have the electrification sources, which are either coming from fossil fuels owned by the distribution companies and the electricity holding company, EHC. The renewable energy sources will be primarily, hopefully in the future, regulated by independent power producers, providing the energy to the charging point operators at the point of delivery. And as we've said, we currently have in Egypt 2 to 3 charging point operators maximum, in which the number of charging stations does not really exceed more than 50 charging locations and up to 150 charging spots which are located. We will start to see in the future as well involvement by the private consumers located at the residential houses, and we'll be describing in a bit how the private sector or residential households can be part of this value chain. Currently, the focus, as we said, is only by the private sector. The government, as we said, is having plans to investigate the sector. At the moment, there is no what we call the roaming hub, or sort of interoperability between these different stations. So whenever the customer or the EV driver would like to be associated with these charging stations, he will have to subscribe with each of these companies separately. The role of the mobility service provider trying to connect the EV drivers with various charging point operators is still a role to be played. Our company is trying to play this sort of role by implementing specific software solution, which we'll be discussing in a bit. And finally, with regard to the aspect of the original equipment manufacturers or the battery manufacturers, the two primary stakeholders which are involved in this aspect are the Ministry of Public Sector and the Ministry of Military Production. And so far, we have not really seen the original equipment manufacturers involved through the market heavily. In fact, they are providing specific press releases that they are not really interested in this market yet. What we have seen are these different various dealerships giving the decree which was issued in 2018. However, with the cancellation of this decree, we'll start really seeing a bit of a pushback within this aspect and pushing from the Ministry of Public Business Sector. The aspect which we are focusing on in our work, we're trying to develop various models to anticipate the market uptake and understanding what are the implications on the sector. Our model is Python-based, taking into his account various economical development like the GDP, the inflation rate, historical vehicle ownership data like the motorization rate, what is the vehicle per capita development model, what are the aging and decommissioning of the cars. We're taking into account as well the EV technical parameters, what are the current policies and regulation in the market, what if questions, what sort of policies and regulation will be inserted and how does it affect the overall market upscaling. The reason why we're using this model was to compare it and validate it against the strategic targets which were published by the Ministry of Ministry of Military Production. What we see in this graph are two different results. The blue graph is looking into the growth of the sales share of AVs according to the Ministry of Military Production figures. As we've stated early on, the targets are looking into nearly 20% by sales by 2025, jumping into 35% by 2035, and finally 40%. These different figures, when compared to our model using a conservative scenario and looking into the current regulatory framework in the market, we would be at best looking at an increase of 1 to 2% in terms of the sales. The questions we're trying to answer together with the stakeholders, how can we fill in this gap and what sort of regulatory frameworks are required and what sort of policies and incentive mechanisms are needed to push this market forward. And what we're also looking at in a different perspective, what will be the grid impact when we try to add these different figures and anticipate the energy demand. So our model as well look into the overall charging load. What we're looking at the right is a typical loading curve throughout the year, in which we're looking here at the July loading curve, which could jump to a peak load of 33 gigawatt. If we would be adding as well the overall charging load, considering the anticipation of the electric vehicles, which will be adding up to 8 to 10 gigawatt in the worst case scenario, we will be reducing the security margin roughly by 15 to 20%. And this is really affecting the marginal security of the power generation within the Egyptian sector. And hence as well, certain planning requirements and improvement to the grids will be needed. Looking at the different key barriers overall on international scale and as well in the market, we still have very high cost of the electric vehicles compared to their internal combustion engine counterparts. The driving range, or the so-called range anxiety by the customers, is one of the primary pushbacks against the push of this technology in the market. the charging time needed in Egypt, if you would need to charge your cars in one of the publicly available stations, which are rated at a maximum of 50 kilowatt, you would require at least an hour to 2 hours to fill your battery completely. The charging infrastructure as well is scattered only within Cairo, with no existing unless only for a few stations which are located in 3 different regions at travels or public highway for traveling between Sofia and Alexandria. So there are still really variable challenges. One other challenge which is not really talked about so much within the Egyptian context is the aspect of the standardization and the implication of the connectivity to the grid. What we can see here is the connectivity from balcony in the 6th or 5th floor, which are located to the electric vehicle itself. These different cables, although now because we have really a maximum of 600 to 1,000 electric vehicles in Egypt, we don't really see these different power quality aspects on the grid. However, when we start really seeing the different figures which were published by the targets of the Ministry of Military Production, this will have really various implications on the grid itself. As we said, given now the different challenges within the sector itself and the pushback from the government, because there is this no still tariff structure to allow charging point operators to push for this market and put a bidding structure, we've been developing a mobile application which start to play the role of a mobility service provider and connecting the different EV owners who have charging stations together with the individuals who have a spot which can charge their station. And this is trying to elevate the difference between the key advantages between private and public charging stations, because you will have to leave your car, for instance, at public stations with hours. So the charger could be stolen, the car could be damaged. This aspect of linking or interoperability between the different CPOs requiring separate radio frequency ID cards will not be required. We will be simplifying this sort of linkage, and the mobile application is available currently at the App Store if someone within the market is looking to investigate with it and trying to elevate the market upscaling for different aspects. Now, jumping into one key aspect I wanted to reflect upon and have a sort of a meaningful discussion about it. What we're looking at here is the qualitative overview of the different deployed policy measures per country to promote electromobility. What we're looking at here are really the developed countries and how have we clustered these different policy measures according to is established in the framework. What we can see that the role and responsibilities of different stakeholders have to be well defined. Currently in Egypt, we sort of having 2 different entities which are heavily involved in the topic, primarily the Ministry of Public Business Sector and the Ministry of Military Production. The Ministry of Electricity is starting to play a role in order to understand what is the impact of integrating these different technologies. The Ministry of Environment is trying to assess the potential CO2 emission reductions. The Ministry of Transport is trying to play the role to as well integrate various electric buses within its routes. The standardization and recommendation, as we said, this is a topic which is still not yet involved in the Egyptian market. The tariff design is still missing. There have been rumors which circulated on social medias in September, October with different charging patterns. However, the official tariff regulation was not yet announced by the Egyptian regulatory agency, EgyptEra. The roaming interoperability is still non-existent in the Egyptian market. Jumping into the vehicle demand, we only had this sort of purchase subsidies. However, it was abolished, as we said, by the Ministry of Trade a few weeks ago. Parking advantages, insurance costs, public transport advantages, still some stuff to be investigated. And finally, the increasing of the infrastructure development. We have not really seen yet, other than some figures that we want to establish 3,000 electric charging stations within the upcoming period. However, what will be the different incentives or promotional mechanism by the government to enforce these technologies is still something to be investigated. Some closing remarks from my side. We are still really trying to understand what will be the current business model, something which would require a sort of a policy clarity and understanding what are the current regulatory framework in the government and what are they actually trying to push for, trying to define different actors and understand how the model of collaboration between them will occur. The education, awareness, and capacity building aspect, both for the consumers, the manufacturer, and the stakeholders, is an aspect which requires really a very big focus, because this is one of the aspects which is pushing back the development of electric vehicles. And finally, understanding what are the drivers by which the Egyptian government is actually pushing for the topic of electromobility and the electrification of the transportation sector. Is it primarily driven by technological trends? Is it primarily to deepen the road of the local manufacturing? Is it to primarily focus on the reduction of the CO2 emissions? Will it be driven by political reasons to reduce the reliance on fossil fuels? So many aspects that needs to be covered. However, all in all, as a final keyword, compared to the other countries within the region, Egypt is really taking some leading roles with regard to the electrification of its transportation sector, both from the private consumers as private electric vehicles, on the electrification side of the transportation sector by e-buses, and as well as other initiatives we mentioned related to natural gas and the introduction of green hydrogen and the use of fossil fuel cells. So yeah, I come to this by the end of my discussion, and I'm happy to answer any questions the audience might have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gendi, for this very interesting presentation. Actually, thank you for raising the 2 points from side. What could be the impact on electric car on the demand for energy, as well as what we call it V2G, what could be the impact on the grid. But what I could consider, there was an article in Al Ahram maybe 2 days ago about in 1902, there was just 2 cars in Egypt, and one of them was owned by the Khedive, and the other one was owned by one of the princes. And he decided to go to Alexandria, and that time the car was moving at 20 kilometers per hour. So they took 10 hours to go. There was no roads at that time suitable for car moving. They make several accidents. This was 1902. Maybe 30 years after, there was roads, there was gas stations, there was cars. So I believe this will move very exponentially in future, and maybe many of the plans which are being set is underestimating this capacity specifically. We are not the only influencer of this. Actually, some of the major car producers mentioned that they will no longer produce internal combustion cars after 2030. Other gas and oil companies are now moving towards this kind of industry. So I believe this might accelerate much faster than what we expect. Sure, it's very nice for the model you presented and mechanism, and we should be proactive in this. We have other questions, but I may move for Dr. Tariq for his presentation, as we are running much of our time, and sorry for keep you late, but I think this was very interesting topics to be raised. Actually, Dr. Tariq Atiyah is a head and professor at the Construction Engineering and Management Research Institute at the Housing and Building National Research Center in Egypt. He is a construction management consultant with over 30 years of experience in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and USA. Dr. Atiyah has received his PhD degree in construction engineering and management from University of North Carolina, United States. He has recently developed a national strategy for Egypt, construction and demolition waste management strategy for Egypt 2019. Also, he led several consultancy projects in Saudi Arabia to develop project management office at the Ministry of Municipalities and Rural Affairs in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Dr. Atiyah is an active member of several engineering codes development teams. These include Smart City Codes, Part 2, which is turning traditional city to smart. And I think we need maybe in future to have a specific webinar on mega cities, the Egyptian Construction Project Management Code, Green Pyramid Rating System for rating sustainable building in Egypt, and finally, Operation and Maintenance Code for public and historical building of Egypt. Dr. Atiyah has published more than 25 research papers in local and international conferences and journals, and supervised many PhD and master degrees. Caesar. Dr. Atiyah will talk to us about impact of housing and building sector on energy demand and transition towards sustainability. Dr. Atiyah, the floor is yours. Dr. Atiyah, are you on? Is Dr. Atiyah available? Or? Yes.
Yes, Dr. Hafiz, thank you very much. Going to just share the screen.
It's already shared. We can see.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hafiz. It's an honor to be with this panel and for this invitation. I'll try to make my presentation short to highlight the role of buildings or impact of housing and building sector on energy demand and transition towards sustainable development.
Dr. Atiyah, I'm sharing it with you.
Oh,
so would you like me to go to the next slide? Just tell me next slide.
Okay. Next slide, please. As we all know, construction and buildings, they are consume very huge amounts of energy. They account for 50% of the materials taken from the Earth's crust. It's a major consumer for materials. 35% of greenhouse gases emissions, and they contribute to 40% of waste produced by weight. Just this year, we are doing a strategy for waste construction and waste management in Egypt. We are estimating 30 to 40 million tons per year from construction and demolition wastes. And of course, it's impacting, buildings are impacting our productivity, our health in residential and commercial and schools and all types of buildings. And also we refer to not only buildings, but buildings and infrastructure, roads and bridges and tunnels, and all our cities are a major consumer of energy. Next, please. HBRC is a major organization that produces or develops the engineering codes for buildings and utilities in Egypt. And actually, we have three very relevant codes that we can shed the light during this presentation. We have the Sustainable Green Buildings Code, what we call Gprs, or Green Pyramids Rating System, very similar to the LEED of the United States. Of course, we have now a new code just developed this year for the first time. It's the Smart Buildings and Smart Cities. Next, please. We refer to green buildings as structures or construction processes and occupancy processes during the operation and maintenance of the buildings that are environmentally responsible, resource efficient throughout the building's life cycle. Buildings last for 50, 70, 80 years. We have the ancient temples in Egypt lasting for 1,000 years and more. So it's very important for us during the design phase, planning and operation and maintenance of those buildings to have in mind the energy efficiency principle. Next, please. For example, now in green buildings, we can use building information modeling techniques, 3D modeling or 4D, 5D modeling in order to simulate the airflow within the building. That will help us or help our designers to make our buildings more energy efficient for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning and similar activities needed during the design phase. Next, please. We can refer to the two main codes that are in place. Actually, one of them is mandatory. It's the Energy Efficiency Code developed in 2005. And these codes have all the measures that can help the designer and the constructor to create an energy efficient building. The other code, which we call Gprs, or Green Pyramids Rating System, is a sustainability rating system in order to evaluate how this building is green in terms of energy efficiency or water or materials or other aspects related to the architectural design. Unfortunately, this code, the Gprs or the green pyramids, is still not mandatory. It's optional. The owner, the constructor can either opt to use or apply this code or not to apply it. And actually, the level of application in Egypt is very weak. Very few buildings have been certified through the Gprs or the Green Pyramids rating system. If you compare this to the lead in the United States, as we know in many countries, they have mandatory requirements for all buildings and then optional requirements for certain types of buildings that the owner can use. Next, please. If we look at the sustainability categories in Gprs, next. Next, please. There are 7 categories, one of them related to the site of the building, sustainable sites, how to choose the site and the orientation of the building. Other category, second one is energy efficiency. The third is water efficiency. Fourth is material and resources, and then indoor environmental quality, and then the management protocols, and finally the innovation and added values. These are the 7 categories that you can attain credits for your building if you apply Gprs. Next, please. For the first one, sustainable sites concentrate on site selection, community services, and connectivity in order to reduce transportation needs. Third one, about public transportation access and pedestrian access. The fourth one about dedicated bicycle tracks, and the last one about heat island effect and trying to reduce the energy or overheating within the building's area. Next, please. For example, in sustainable sites, it talks about how much green areas you have within the complex of the building, using shade trees, cool roofs or green roofs, living walls, and reflective paving. Next, please. Also in sustainable sites, you look at community connectivity, and this is having in mind to reduce the transportation needs for this community. How with the distance, measuring the distance to public transportation and to services in order to reduce the energy consumption. Next, please. For the energy efficiency, which is the most relevant to our discussion today, the building code or the green building code talks about building envelope improvement, how to make the building envelope more airtight in order to reduce the losses in air conditioning and heating, the passive heat gain reduction, renewable energy resources using renewables will give you credits, energy efficient HVAC systems. Of course, those systems will cost a little bit more during the construction phase, but it will pay back during the operation and maintenance, using the efficient artificial lighting systems for the natural lighting, and then the vertical transportations for elevators. Next, please. The strategies that we use in buildings in order to reduce or increase the energy efficiency, optimize the daylighting to full possible extent. We have to use more daylight than artificial lighting, efficient lighting design, of course, using the devices that consume less energy, and dedicated outdoor air treatment in order to reduce the level or the consumption of the heating and air conditioning. Next, please. Other strategies include efficient and tight envelope, appropriate when installed insulation for the windows and the envelope of the building, shading, light colored roofs, of course, using the high efficiency HVAC, optimized control systems or automated systems, using the Energy Star appliances and selecting the most efficient appliances within the building. So all of these are strategies recommended by the Green Pyramids rating system in Egypt. Next, please. Another important category in the code is the indoor environmental quality. We have to monitor and improve the ventilation performance, having more healthy environment within the building, controlling smoking, of course, banning smoking inside the building, and then the three aspects of achieving thermal comfort, visual comfort, and acoustic comfort. All of these have requirements and credits given by the Gprs or the Green Pyramids Rating System in Egypt. Next, please. Of course, building automation, which drives us to the idea or the code of smart cities and smart buildings. You have to use the technology in order, for example, occupancy sensors, CO2 sensors in the building, and having an automated system that can reduce the consumption of energy given or knowing the number of occupants in a certain floor or certain room or certain area. Next, please. I'm proposing here a model for energy and building integration. Next, please. And this could be the last slide. As we see in this model, our cities includes buildings and infrastructure. It's residential, schools, factories, commercial areas. So those are the components of our cities. And of course, buildings produce municipal waste and construction and demolition waste during the construction phase or even during a maintenance and renovation phase. We have transportation needs within the city. So we have to look at those four components: our buildings, our infrastructure, the waste management, and the transportation in an optimized and integrated way. Of course, our cities, we have the target to reduce emissions. We have to integrate the city design and the urban planning of the city with the targets of emission reductions, reducing the energy and material consumption, and that could be through the energy efficient code and the green buildings code and the smart city code. So we have three codes that can help achieving those targets. And then promoting energy generation. Now, most buildings is targeting to have PV cells or any renewable energy generation. So this model in mind, we have to first integrate the three codes together: the Green Pyramids Rating System with the energy efficient buildings system with the smart city or smart building code. The codes are not integrated yet. They have been developed since 2005, 2010, and recently into 2020, the smart city code. So those people who develop the codes need to sit together, integrate their work in order to advise us on which design techniques, which technologies could be used, how to measure the efficiency of energy consumption in buildings or in our cities or in our facilities. I believe there is a lot of effort that can be done between HBRC and other organizations in Egypt targeting the energy efficiency. Of course, if we reduce energy consumption in our buildings, we can enjoy an overall energy efficient country, reducing emissions and promoting renewable energy generation. Materials that are used in buildings, it's huge amounts. It's manufactured, extracted from nature, manufactured, transported, and used in the buildings. We have to reduce that as well. And I believe we can achieve the targets of the energy strategy by working together and integrating our sectors together. By this, I conclude and thank you all. I'm ready for any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Tarek, very much for the very interesting presentation, specifically what you mentioned by the end about needs for code integration for smart energy efficiency and Green Pyramids code. I think this is very much important to be considered and maybe consider one of our recommendations in the recommendation came out of this webinar. I will go very quickly for some questions we received. I appreciate to keep our answers too short. The first question goes to George from Amr Khairi. Is about, I see there is an increasing interest for hydrogen. Can you please talk about a bit about efficiency of hydrogen-based system. Are the systems matured enough to be integrated in the energy mix? George?
Well, there's a lot of interest in hydrogen at the moment, so technologies are still being developed, but I believe that pretty soon we will have the possibility to be fully integrated within the energy system overall, because of the large interest that exists.
Okay, thank you. If Mr. Helmi is still with us, okay, we have a question about, did Cecum use solar drying in their products? So use solar drying, solar energy in drying process in your products and plants? He's not active. Okay, I may switch to the next question, which goes to Dr. Khaled Abu Zaid. It's about the new Delta Future project. Are salinity level similar to El Moghra? How suitable is the groundwater for agriculture? Dr.
Yes,
Abu Zaid?
thank you, Dr. Hafiz. I actually just answered this question on the chat box, but let me say that the groundwater quality in this new project area, the new Delta, is of a better quality, less salinity probably than El Moghra. However, the main source is going to be reused, treated agriculture drainage water, which is going to come from the what is called Al Hammam agriculture drainage treatment plant. This is a new plant that is being built on the coastal area, in the north, and it's going to convey this treated agriculture drainage to this area. And it's also mixed with treated wastewater of international standards as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you already answered some of the question about irrigation and how it could be used in irrigation network for hydraulic power generation using the existing structure like barrages. I think this already has been answered. There is a question. Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I mean, this is a very good recommendation. I actually mentioned it in my presentation, but the participant, they said that they have already done this study on these potential mini hydropower. So I think that this study should be presented to the officials in charge, and it should be put up for implementation, of course.
There is a question which is to all participants, which goes from Ben Salim Ghazi to all panelists. Has a storage strategic study for Egyptian electricity network being carried out? What are the objectives of the Egyptian government in terms of storage capacity, pumping, storage, and if I allow myself to answer, already there is several pumping and storage project is being considered. There is a 3 capacity of 6.4. Maybe this is not enough, but already this is what has been announced so far. There is 2.4 gigawatt at Ata'a and 2 gigawatt each at both Armant and North Luxor. But also, I believe some of the international interconnection could help in that approach, specifically like interconnection between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, where already it's being agreed that this will be a kind of a settlement. We will export electricity during daytime to Saudi Arabia while they have a peak, and we import back by night. Principally, we will export solar energy during daytime to Saudi Arabia and get it back by night. So practically, Saudi Arabia will support our system as a storage facility to our renewable energy sources. So I say that it's collective, including interconnection, storage facilities, as technology for batteries being improved. And as Dr. Gendi mentioned to us regarding electric mobility and substantial capacity of storage batteries, which will be on the system, where this could add a more important dimension to integration between the electric system or the energy system in general and electric mobility, where these batteries could be used as a source for stabilizing the grid in case of interruption, as is being connected as batteries where there is no investment utility in this battery. It's already there in the car. Each car may have a battery of a capacity 50 kilowatt. So if we have 1 million cars, so we talk about 5 gigawatt of storage capacity. So this will be substantial, and how this could need to be coordinated. At this point, I've unfortunately Dr. Ghada left because she has another commitment at 12. But for sure, we will discuss with her about what her recommendation from an internal policy and how this could be coordinated. And we have already a question, which I believe an open question from Mr. Jihan Bayoumi, which is how do we in Egypt work towards energy system integration while existing institutional framework doesn't allow it and doesn't identify one entity responsible for overall energy planning, and the responsibility is split between various ministries. This is practically one of the challenges, and this is a core message of this webinar. I believe, as we have seen, there is several plans for different sectors. However, many of these plans are being on a different time horizon. We heard about water planning up to 2050. We heard about energy strategy 2035. We talk about Egypt strategy 2030. There is a plan for electric mobility 2040. I believe this different horizon doesn't make a good environment for having a kind of an integrated planning process we need to unify the horizon. Also, as it has been shown that data exchange, it's an intensive data exchange, and it shouldn't be just a kind of exchanging data on a boundary between sectors, but it needs a kind of an interactive process. Supreme Council maybe looks like a body for this integration, yet Supreme Council is still a decision-making council. However, this Supreme Council don't have any mechanism or entities which can go deeper for energy integration. I recommend, or I appreciate very much for all our participants to send their recommendations. And we try to collect this recommendation and cross-cut it and to come up with a general recommendation where we could distribute it later. And also we will consult with Dr. Ghada about what could be the proper internal policy for the country in order to achieve this integration for energy, which I believe is crucial to reach our target. At this point, I'm sorry to keep you too late. We are exceeded our time by 1 hour, but I think the topic was very much interesting. I would like to thank all our presenters for the wealth of information they provided to us and their experience. And I believe this was a unique opportunity to listen to this very professional experts on the different aspects of the energy and other sectors. Also, I would like to thank Marion for her effort for putting this webinar together, contacting presenters, preparing agenda, and even follow up and managing this presentation. I would like to thank all our participants for their contribution and enthusiasm and proposal of and posing question and waiting for your recommendation to help us to develop a kind of a vision about what could be the recommendation in future in order to achieve this integrated approach. Thank you very much, and see you on our next webinar, and looking forward to see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Hafiz. Bye-bye.
Shukran, Dr.